Hello, everyone.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
How is everyone this afternoon? Everyone's muted. Unmute our, let me see. Okay. So I've really enjoyed reading what you've written about your poems, as well as the so far 3 scenes from Franklin's life that you've written. So we have Franklin and his brother. We have Franklin and Ms. Reed, Franklin and Ralph in London. I think we really have the makings of a great play. And also the poems that people have sent in have also been very impressive. And just last week, people were saying that we didn't know much about poetry. So you've clearly learned a lot in a week. So I, of course, credit your instructors. And let me see, does anyone have any questions? I mean, it's been, I've enjoyed reading them. Look forward to more. And if you've not yet done it, you can take a look at the class blog and you'll see how talented your classmates are, and you will be inspired to do the same. Okay, good. So I had planned, if we were going to be in class, to have us share our work. It might be a little awkward to do that now, but I think we probably should just talk about what we've done. If you'd like to read your poem, you may, or if you want to recite it, that's even better. And so who would like to start? I'm not calling on Tyler, but I was really impressed that someone took civil disobedience and turned it into verse. I'm sure Thoreau wished he could have done that himself. And it's a long essay. So you must have condensed it a bit, or did you condense it?
I tried to just take like the most important points from it. I thought it is like a 30-page essay. So I thought I'd try to whittle it down to like roughly a page for a poem.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, poetry is condensing something, and some of you had shorter pieces to begin with, but you all found something really interesting to work with. And so let me see who else has written. I was really impressed. And Katie wrote about, believe it or not, Kris Jenner and the Kardashians, and I am sure poems have been written about them. Probably not quite as good as yours. How did you happen to choose them for a topic? That for a topic, I should say.
Well, when you were just talking about it, I kind of thought you wanted us to do something more like classical, but I just thought it'd be funny if I did like a celebrity post in Daily Mail, like everyone kind of makes fun of it.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. And I also like the fact that you thought I wanted one thing, so you went in the other direction. That's good. That shows creativity, which is actually one of the things we're supposed to be striving for this semester, is creativity. So I admire the fact that you did that. And yeah, good. And let me see. And Aaron, I just read yours, Aaron, which was really sobering. It's about the Vietnam War, rose-tinted memory. So where did that come from?
It kind of came from within the essay. I mean, they talked about, how it was a tinted memory and, it was tinted shades of red, white, and blue. But I mean, it was just an interesting essay because it was all about how the Vietnam War, but from the perspective of the other side, not just the United States perspective of it, which is a side that you don't hear a whole lot about ever.
Okay. Maybe. I'm a little suspect that the Vietnam War has a red, white, and blue tint to the memory, but you're a different generation, so maybe it's changed. So interesting. No, very good. And who wrote the essay?
I don't remember the authors. It was a weird who the author of the essay itself came from. I don't remember his exact name off the top of my head. Okay.
Well, we'll probably come back to it. So yeah, let me see. And Rose, that was good. The parallel pandemic was kind of about doctors and professionals being burned out. Where did you find that?
It was just a New York Times article. I looked when it was assigned. It was like one of the articles of the week, and it's basically just talking about how a lot of professional healthcare workers are like leaving their profession. Like the pandemic has like pushed them to a breaking point, and I just thought it was really interesting because it's kind of a current issue we're not really hearing about amidst all the other chaos in the
Right.
news.
Yeah, no, that was good. And let's see, Sydney, yours on the dog. So,
Yeah, it was from a New Yorker article that this woman wrote about this like old dog that she had, and then she gets like a puppy before the old dog dies. It's kind of sad, but when I read it, I really liked it, so
yeah,
I figured I would use it.
that's good. I mean, it was good. It was well done. The poem was. I haven't read the article. And Gordon, you probably did the most condensing of anyone, I think. It was about an oil rig.
Yeah, I wrote mine about like this oil rig thing, and like the fact that they're turning old disused oil rigs into like reefs. And I tried to like do it from the perspective of like the oil rig, and it was a weird way to write it, but yeah.
We seem to have lost Gordon's audio. So let's see, Kavia, you had the mnemonic induction of lucid dreams, which has an acronym. So how did you find that essay?
Professor, you're cutting in and out a little bit.
I'm sorry. We'll try it again. Can you hear me now? Okay, so let's go back then to Gordon. Do you write much in poetry?
I did a couple years ago, and it was always really short. I love shortening things, and I love writing really succinct, short things. So this kind of played well with that, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I also like shortening things too. So you're wondering why I don't shorten the class, I suppose. Yeah, okay. Let's see. So Kavia, the mnemonic induction of lucid dreams. How did you happen to find that? Is that something you're interested in?
I honestly just looked at psychology articles.
Your sound, my audio is a little down for you. Let me see if we can turn you up. Can you now, yes, you're a little soft, a little faint, but.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, there you go.
Okay. So honestly, I'm just really interested in psychology, like as a whole. So I just looked up psychology articles and essays, and I thought doing one about the lucid dreaming techniques would be interesting.
Oh, good, very good, good. That was. And so these all, oh yeah, Chloe on the Louvre, the empty Louvre.
Yeah, I just found a New York Times article, and it was already like I forgot to link the article, my bad. But it was already like it had a cool perspective where it started out like it said that like even though no one's there, like the Mona Lisa is still smiling, or I forget the exact title. Like I can find it and link it. But it was a cool perspective, and I just wanted to kind of like I guess shorten it, but also kind of reorganize it and just kind of put it through my own words. So it was a cool article.
Good. It was a good poem. And so a lot of you found you had to shorten it a lot because poetry is different. Some of you rhymed, some of you didn't, which was okay, but you're really just taking this thing and turning it into something else, which was really, well, it worked better than I thought it was going to. And maybe it's because you're a higher caliber group than I'm used to working with. So good. And then the three very good scenes. I have to say the Cameron and Brittany, I read yours first, and that's the one. Let me just remember that's the one involving James Ralph and swimming. Are Cameron and Brittany here?
Ours was the scene with Miss Reed.
Miss Reed. Okay, yours was Miss Reed. Okay, yes, that was good. Okay, good scene. That was a good scene with Miss Reed, and then the Alfred, the side guy, comes in with the dead flowers, and there's a lot of funny stuff there. So can you tell us, I don't know, maybe we should read it, or maybe you should act it out. I said we weren't going to act it out, but it seems all of these, just like poems, are really meant to be read aloud or recited. Did anyone else have a chance to read any of the, or you all were busy writing your own, so you didn't have a chance to look at others? So Miss Reed, that was a good scene. Did you, thank you, Chloe, add anything to it? I mean, you added the guy, the side guy.
Yeah, pretty much it's that Benjamin Franklin is going to ask Mrs. Reed for her blessing in marrying Miss Reed, but she doesn't approve because he's just a printer. And then while he goes there to ask for the blessing, her side guy shows up, ready to also kind of ask for the blessing. And both have a kind of a fight about who's gonna kind of take the heart of Miss Reed, but then Ben Franklin gets upset that she had a side guy, and they both leave her.
Yeah, they both leave, so she loses out. Yeah, that's, there's I think probably a lesson there. So there's a good bit of, should we say, dramatic license there, but I think it worked. Okay, good. Other things anyone, is Cameron? Yeah, Cameron is with us. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think she well summarized the plot of the first episode of the soap opera.
Okay, good. So this is the first episode, so you're going to go on with this.
Of course.
Good, good. So what's the next scene?
I can't say too much yet.
Okay. Good, good. Okay, good. Then let's see. Actually, Maddie and Bella, before we jumped off of poems, you guys wrote about someone named Phoebe Bridgers.
Yeah, we found a review of Phoebe Bridgers, an album that she wrote, and we wrote a poem about that.
Good. Now, is it kind of in the style of Phoebe Bridgers, or is it just your own take on the article?
Yeah, it kind of is like in the style of Phoebe Bridgers, I guess. Okay.
As you can probably tell, I don't know who Phoebe Bridgers is, but I welcome being enlightened and learning things. So good. So did you shorten it a bit, or is it pretty much just, paragraph by paragraph, the Phoebe Bridgers article?
We started to do like paragraph by paragraph, but then we realized that would be like kind of long, so we shortened it.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I don't know if anyone wants to read an epic poem about Phoebe Bridgers. You would be like the James Ralph of our class, writing an epic poem about Phoebe Bridgers. And do you want to go on with it, or did you have enough?
I think that it was probably long enough. It would get pretty repetitive if we made it any longer.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's see. Good. Then I know I have here the, so let's see, Kayla and Victor, you're the ones who wrote about swimming in James Ralph.
Yeah.
Anything you want to tell us about your scene?
I mean, we just saw how, we just remember the fact that Ben Franklin tried to make a move on Ralph's girl while Ralph was away. So we were like, we should, dramatize it to make it somewhat entertaining. And then how you added like he was in the Swimming Hall of Fame or whatever, and he was very prideful, like before he like tried to improve himself. So
yeah, good. So they have this encounter on the banks of the Thames, and what happens? Can you tell us, for those who haven't read Read your scene?
Yeah. So Ben is swimming in the river after a soap opera, and everybody was like, "Oh, we heard you're a crazy swimmer," and he's like, "Ah, nah." And then he's like, "Oh, come on, go and swim." And he was like, "All right, fine." And then he tries to show off, basically. And while he's swimming and stuff, that's when Ralph returns from where he came from, and he was like, "Oh, I heard you were talking to my girl or whatever." And he was like, yeah, but I was just doing that just to be compensated for like giving you money and all sorts
Yeah.
of other ways to help him. And he was like, hey, that's not cool. And so basically they just fought over that.
Yeah, so it has a lot in it. It's good. It's, yeah, I mean, each of you who did a scene really put a lot in and condensed, and you have the other people jumping in the river and so on. So that was, I thought that was well done. And the final scene, we're actually working our way backward, was Benjamin Franklin's decision to leave Philadelphia. And that was also a well done scene because it has his fight with his brother. And that was, let's see, Andre and Anna and Emma, who did the dramatic scene where Benjamin Franklin decides to leave I'm sorry, not leave Philadelphia, leave Boston. And his father is in it. These two brothers can't get along. And what happens?
So, we talked about how, first of all, how James, the brother, started out at like creating the newspaper, and then we like built up the tension to where like they had a bunch of separate fights, and like Benjamin Franklin, he was getting really annoyed. So we kind of built up the tension a lot, and then talked about how James went to jail for political involvement, and then how eventually they like it all bubbled up into like a big fight before, as we talked about in class, James told other printers not to hire him in Boston, so then he went to New York.
Yes, and then to Philadelphia. Good, good, good. No, this is good. I look forward to more scenes. I think we really could turn this into a full-length thing. Good. So let's look again at the autobiography, which I have high hopes you are reading. Is anyone now finished with part 2, which we started talking about last time? Okay. Well, good. So we'll still talk about part 1 because there is a lot in this. As I said, you read this carefully. This is a great how-to book. And one of my favorite scenes is just after Franklin arrives in Philadelphia. We already talked about his arrival in Philadelphia, and this is when he goes to find work. Remember, in New York, he had met with a guy named Bradford who owns a printing shop in New York. And he hoped he could get a job with Bradford. But Bradford doesn't have any work for him, says, go to Philadelphia and maybe my son can give you a job. Remember, there are only 8 printing offices in the United States, only 8 printing presses. There are 5 of them in Boston. And then there's 1 in New York, 2 in Philadelphia. So if Franklin strikes out in Philadelphia, he's really stuck. And he gets to Philadelphia, and Bradford Jr. does not have a job for him. So that means he has to go to the other printer in Philadelphia, a guy named Keemer. Now, what's the relationship between Bradford Jr. and Keemer, the other printer? It's okay if you haven't read it. It's okay if you don't know anything about 18th century business in Philadelphia. You have 2 printers in town. What's their relationship going to be with each other?
It's not very good.
Why would you say that, Sydney?
because they're in like competition for business with each other.
Yeah, exactly. They're competitors. They're working against each other. If someone goes in to get something printed at Keemer's shop, it means they're not going to Bradford's. So these two guys are competitors. So here is this young guy who wants to become a printer. There is no work at Bradford's shop, so says, well, go to my competitor. And so he does. And then the old and the senior Bradford happens to be there too. The old gentleman said he would go with me to the new printer. And when we found him, neighbor, says Bradford, I have brought to see you a young man of your business. Perhaps you may want such a one. He asked me, that is, Keemer asked me a few questions, put a composing stick in my hand. This is what a printer uses to line up the type, to see how I worked, and then said he would employ me soon, though he had just then nothing for me to do. And taking old Bradford, whom he had never seen before, to be one of the townspeople that had a good will for him, entered into a conversation on his present undertaking and prospects, while Bradford, not discovering that he was the other printer's father, on Keemer saying he expected soon to get the greatest part of the business into his own hands, drew him on by artful questions and starting little doubts to explain all his views, what interest he relied on, and in what manner he intended to proceed. I, who stood by and heard all, saw immediately that one of them was a crafty old sophister and the other a mere novice. What does he mean by this? One of these guys is a crafty old sophister and the other is a novice.
One of them like knows what he's doing and the other one kind of doesn't.
Yeah, which one knows what he's doing?
Like Mr. Bradford, is that his name?
Bradford, yeah. The old guy knows what he's doing. And he's getting this guy who thinks he knows a lot to tell all about how he is going to get all the business away from Bradford. And old Bradford doesn't say, what do you mean? That's my son. He says, oh, yes, that's right. He's getting him to talk. He's getting him to tell everything. This is really an important lesson for Franklin. It's an important lesson for all of us. And you know, the old sophister is the one who doesn't say, hey, my son's also a printer. Here's a guy who's a printer, but simply says, hey, neighbor, here's someone who wants to be a printer. And I, who stood by, was, and so Bradford left me with Keemer, who was greatly surprised when I told him who the old man was, because basically he had just told his competitor's father all of his business plans, which I guess could be an awkward thing. So, Franklin is learning. The thing is, he's putting into this book these helpful episodes so you can see how you can do this same thing. And he's learning a lot in all of this. Now, he gets to Philadelphia, as we said, and he comes to the attention of the governor. It's kind of a circuitous thing. His Franklin's brother-in-law is a sea captain, comes to the Delaware River, finds out that his brother-in-law, the runaway teenager, is here, and goes to meet him. And he happens to be meeting with the governor, and the governor is impressed with this young printer. And so the governor wants to, how shall we put it? The governor promises to set Franklin up in business, but first he needs Franklin to go to Boston and borrow money from his father. So the governor sends Franklin back to Boston with a letter of recommendation from the governor. I don't know, how would your father react if you showed up at home and the governor wanted him to loan you money and support you in business? I mean, it's a strange thing to go to your father with a letter of recommendation from the governor, and his father says that he doesn't think the governor is showing much sense. Who would you agree with here? Is the governor showing more sense than Franklin's father?
I think his dad shows more sense because if the governor really wanted to support him, he would use his own money because that's kind of the job of a sponsor, not to ask other people for money to sponsor. Otherwise, his father would be the true sponsor instead of the governor.
That's
So
true.
I don't really think he's asking for money in the best interest of like Franklin's business. I think he might have another reason behind it.
Yeah, undoubtedly he does. Yeah. So, yeah, so the governor isn't showing much sense. And later on, we find out how little Franklin should have trusted the governor's word, that the governor isn't the best person to rely on for this kind of support. So it turns out, after all, that Josiah Franklin was right. And okay, let me see if there is anything else here. You know, as I read through it, I keep coming across these episodes that are, Franklin showing us the kinds of things to avoid. Now, he talks a lot about his friend Collins, whom he had left Philadelphia with. And Collins had landed in Rhode Island and makes his way finally to Philadelphia. And let me see. At New York, I found my friend Collins, who had arrived there sometime before me. We had been intimate from children, had read the same books together, but he had the advantage of more time for reading and studying and a wonderful genius for mathematical learning in which he far outstripped me. When I lived in Boston, most of my hours of leisure for conversation were spent with him, and he continued a sober as well as industrious lad, was much respected for his learning by several of the clergy and other gentlemen, and seemed to promise making a good figure in life. So Collins, friend from childhood, had been Franklin's best friend, and was also, he says, smarter than Franklin, and also seems to have come from a wealthier background than Franklin. So Collins has all of these advantages. So what happens to Collins?
Doesn't he like kind of just become an alcoholic?
Yes, he does. He had acquired a habit of sotting with brandy. I found by his own account and what I heard from others that he had been drunk every day since his arrival at New York and behaved very oddly. He had gamed too. What does that mean?
Is that gambling?
Yeah, he gambled. So he had gambled and lost his money, so that I was obliged to discharge his lodgings and defray his expenses to and at Philadelphia. So Franklin has to pay the guy's room and board and then help set him up in Philadelphia so that he could get there. So here is the guy who has all of these advantages, and then this happens. And here, Franklin also has his encounter with the governor of New York, where they hear about this young man who has all of these books. And so that's his, this contrast you're setting up. Collins, the one with the advantages, Franklin, the one without. So you have throughout the book these encounters with other people. Ralph is another one. The governor is another one, who are somehow falling off this path that Franklin is on. And there's a how shall we put it? Well, it's really unnecessary. So Franklin gets to Philadelphia, as we know, and then is sent to London. And London, he has more of these encounters and then comes back to Philadelphia by the end of part one, gets married, and then part two, which we started talking about last time, is all about achieving moral perfection, creating a daily schedule. And I should have found the schedule to share with you. In my copy of the book, it's on page, let me see, 94, where he begins every day with a morning question. And the morning question is, what good shall I do today? And then he has an evening question. And what is the evening question?
What good have I done today?
What good have I done today? Yes. So that's the beginning and the end of the day. And then what's the first thing he does in the morning when he gets up? Between 5 and 7, he has the day broken down. So from 5 to 7, what does he do? Or I'm sorry, 5 to 8.
Well, it says he wakes up and address powerful goodness, contrive day's business, and take the resolution of the day.
Yes. And what else? There's more there, Sydney.
Prosecute the present, study, and breakfast with a question mark.
Yeah, breakfast is a question mark.
Mhm.
Not sure if he'll get to that. What is powerful goodness? Whom he addresses. Sydney, yes, Tyler.
Is that like a way of saying like he's like praying in the morning?
I think so. I mean, he's talked a little bit about, well, he will talk more about his religious beliefs. Last time we talked about how he had stopped going to the Presbyterian church, but he does get up and address powerful goodness, which is his conception of the creator or the force governing the good force governing the universe. He grew up in a very strict puritanical town, that is Boston was, and is always questioning. As a child, he had read through all of his father's books on polemical theology and came off doubting the truth of these various creeds. But he still has this. And this morning question and evening question are not original to Franklin. Probably the most important minister in Boston, Cotton Mather, had in his book, Essays to Do Good, a similar kind of thing. You begin every day by asking, what good shall I do today? And you conclude by asking, what good have I done today? And of course, you begin by addressing God. But Franklin isn't saying God, he is saying powerful goodness, which is a different way of putting it. It's kind of a curious thing why he's not saying, I thank God for the day. He's thanking powerful goodness, which is a different way of putting that. But he gets all of this from Cotton Mather. I mean, Cotton Mather had a similar schedule for his days. Mather, whom we will be talking more about because he does play a role in Franklin's life, is probably Boston's most prolific writer of all time. Mather writes about 300 books. Some of them are quite short, and some of them are so long they've never actually been printed. He wrote a commentary on the Bible that has never been published in its entirety. He also wrote essentially the first real history of New England, the Magnalia Christi Americana. And he also wrote this book, Essays to Do Good, and he set up little groups who would meet together and talk about what good they could do. It was, so Franklin is borrowing a lot from Cotton Mather, but Mather is doing all of this to glorify God. Franklin is doing this for another reason. You know, powerful goodness is here, but I'm not quite sure powerful goodness is the motivating force here. It seems to be something else. So you have Franklin getting up in the morning, rising, washing, addressing powerful goodness, contrive the day's business, and take the resolution of the day and prosecute the present study. That is between 5 and 8. You have 3 hours to do a lot. And then breakfast is, as Sydney said, with a question mark. You know, we don't know if we can fit that in these first 3 hours. Okay, so then what do we do between 8 and noon? So you have 4 hours. What do you do then?
Work.
Work, okay, yeah, that's, yeah, work. And then between 12 and 2, what's on the docket?
Read or overlook my accounts and dine.
Yeah, okay, so then you'll have the big meal, but you'll also read. You'll also overlook your accounts. Make sure you've done everything that you should. Good. And then between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock?
Work.
Worked. Okay, so you have 8 hours to work between 8 and noon, and then between 2 and 6 and work. And then between 6 and 9, what is it we do?
Put things in their places, supper,
Yep.
music, or diversion, conversation, and examination of the day.
Yeah, good, good. So, yeah, so you put things in their places, you have supper, and music or other diversion or conversation, and then examine the day. And this is the question you ask: what good have I done today? So it's a great schedule, and it is, it is something that is going to make Franklin, well, what? Is he going to be glorifying God the way Cotton Mather had hoped doing this would?
I think it probably just makes him pretty productive.
Yes, it makes him very productive. Yeah, he is always doing something. And this was, again, something that came up in his virtues, always to be about something. Not, wasn't one of the virtues not to waste any time. And let me see if I have, where do I, not to waste time, order, resolution, industry, lose no time, be always employed in something useful, cut off all unnecessary actions. That's number 6 for those of you who are remembering them. And so this is one of his virtues. And you see order is also part of this. You put things in their places at the end of the day, but you're also always working. And he does say, let me see, this is a little further back, I believe. So I opened a little stationer's shop. This is after he's returned to Philadelphia. I had in it blanks of all sorts, the correctest that ever appeared among us, being assisted in that by my friend Brintsnell. I had also paper, parchment, Chapman's books, and one White Mash, a compositor I had known in London, an excellent workman, now came to me and worked with me constantly and diligently. I took as apprentice the son of Aquila Rose. Aquila Rose was the printer who had died. And you may recall that when Franklin went to visit the printing shop of Kiemer was putting together an ode to Aquila Rose, who had died. So here Franklin now takes Aquila Rose's son as his apprentice. And I began now gradually to pay off the debt I was under for the printing house. In order to secure my credit and character as a tradesman, I took care not only to be in reality industrious and frugal, but to avoid all appearances to the contrary. I dressed plainly. I was seen at no places of idle diversion. I never went out a fishing or a shooting. A book, indeed, sometimes debauched me from my work, but that was seldom, snug, and gave no scandal. And to show that I was not above my business, I sometimes brought home the paper I purchased at the stores through the streets in a wheelbarrow. Thus being esteemed an industrious, thriving young man and paying duly for what I bought, the merchants who imported stationery solicited my custom, others proposed supplying me with books, and I went on swimmingly. In the meantime, Kiemer's credit and business declining daily, he was at last forced to sell his printing house to satisfy his creditors. He went to Barbados and there lived some years in very poor circumstances. So another character who isn't Benjamin Franklin finds out what comes of that. He winds up going broke, having to go to Barbados, and dies poor. So you have these two choices. You have Franklin, who not only always is busy, but always seems busy. Kiemer would never push a wheelbarrow full of paper through the street. That would be beneath him as the owner of a printing shop. But it's not beneath Franklin as the owner of a stationery shop to do that. People see him and they know that he pays his bills. You never see him going hunting, going fishing, playing cards or dice or doing these other distractions. Sometimes you catch him reading a book. So this is the appearance, is the next best thing to actually being the kind of virtuous, hardworking person Franklin wants you to be. Okay, so, and he remembers, let me see. When he comes back to Philadelphia, in addition to achieving moral perfection, the big public improvement he wants to establish is a library. And so this becomes his real object. The real thing he's doing is working on creating a library. And he actually tells you how to go about raising money if you ever need to. Let me see. So he creates a library, and he had to contend. I had a young family coming to be educated. I had to contend with for business 2 printers who were established in the place before me. So he's setting up as a printer at the same time as Keemer and Bradford are both set up as printers. Remember, he had started out trying to work for them, but now he's going into business in competition with them. I spent no time at taverns, games, or frolics of any kind. He's also now married. He has a child, so he can't really spend time at taverns, games, or other amusements, although there are people who are married and have children who do those things. I had a young family coming on to be educated. I was in debt for my printing house, and I had to contend for these 2 printers established. My circumstances, however, grew daily easier, my original habits of frugality continuing. And my father, having among his instructions to me when a boy, frequently repeated a proverb of Solomon, "Seest thou a man diligent in his labor? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men." What does this mean? A man diligent in his calling will stand before kings and not stand before mean men. Yes, Tyler.
Like people who are serious about their work will be successful.
That's one way of putting it, yeah. Who are mean men, by the way?
Maybe he means like, I don't know, like people you don't want to associate yourself with.
Well, does anyone know what again, think about the 18th century meaning of the term. Doesn't mean nasty or unpleasant. It means people of reduced circumstances. Mean meaning you're poor, essentially. But you will stand before kings, not stand before mean men. It's, again, another 18th century thing, whom you stand before. In whose presence do you stand up? Typically, you stand up in the presence of someone who is your superior. So a king would be, but a mean man won't be. That is, you will be superior to them. So this is really your way of, as you said, becoming successful. I from thence considered industry as a means of obtaining wealth and distinction, which encouraged me, though I did not think that I should ever literally stand before kings, which has, however, since happened. For I have stood before 5, and even had the honor of sitting down with one, the King of Denmark, to dinner. So his father was right again. Not only has Franklin stood before kings, but he also sat down to dinner with a king. Has anyone else here stood before a king or sat down to dinner with a king? No, not yet. I mean, this is your way to do this. And this is also when he realizes he should get married. So he goes through the story we had the other day about deciding to marry Deborah or move in with her and so on. And And he has this proverb, he that would thrive must ask his wife. It was lucky for me that I had one as much disposed to industry and frugality as myself. She assisted me cheerfully in my business, folding and stitching pamphlets, tending shop, purchasing old linen rags for the paper makers, etc., etc. We kept no idle servants. Our table was plain and simple, our furniture of the cheapest. For instance, my breakfast was a long time bread and milk, no tea, and I ate it out of a twopenny earthen porringer with a pewter spoon. But mark how luxury will enter families and make a progress in spite of principle. Being called one morning to breakfast, I found it in a china bowl with a spoon of silver. They had been bought for me without my knowledge by my wife, and had cost her the enormous sum of 23 shillings, for which she said she had no other excuse or apology to make, but she thought her husband deserved a silver spoon and china bowl as well as any of his neighbors. This was the first appearance of plate and china in our house, which afterwards, in the course of years, as our wealth increased, augmented gradually to several £100 in value. So Deborah thinks her husband should have a china bowl and a silver spoon, the same way as the neighbors did, and so gets him one. But the important thing is they can afford it. Okay, so you have Franklin seeing this as a way to wealth or a way to success, all of these virtues he had inculcated. And then part 3 of the book, he begins actually when he's back in Philadelphia. He finished part 2 when he was in France during the, actually we can talk more about another piece of this. Yeah, so he did have his whole way of becoming a better conversationalist. Yeah, and he also says he was a bad speaker, never eloquent, subject to much hesitation in my choice of words, hardly correct in language, and yet I generally carried my points. So he recognizes something, that he's not a good public speaker. And that, of course, can be a serious liability. However, it's more important, he would say, to have things to say than to be able to say them well. And part 3, he starts writing in 1788. So this is 17 years after he started writing part 1 of the book. So part 3, he's writing when he's back in Philadelphia, having been in Paris between 1776 and 1785. And now he returns, 1788, he is 82 years old. And he doesn't have his papers with him. Many of them had been lost during the war. But he does have, in this section, a lot more on his religious ideas. Because here he talks about his the creed he resolved, and he decides that in his time of leisure, let's see, he put down from time to time on pieces of paper such thoughts as occurred to me respecting it. Most of these are lost, but I find one purporting to be the substance of an intended creed. So he creates, again, thinking about his connection with all-powerful goodness or powerful goodness. My idea is that then he wants to create basically a religious sect, which will be open to everyone. And let me put it in his words. This creed contains the essentials of every known religion, and being free of everything that might shock the professors of any religion. It is expressed in these words, that there is one God who made all things, that he governs the world by his providence, that he ought to be worshipped by adoration, prayer, and thanksgiving, but that the most acceptable service of God is doing good to man, that the soul is immortal, and that God will certainly reward virtue and punish vice either now or hereafter. So fairly simple. What do you make of this religious creed? as he says, it has the essentials of every known religion, but nothing that will shock the professors of any. And then he will spread this first among young and single men only. And each person who's initiated will go through the 13 weeks practicing of the virtues, which Franklin said after 13 weeks, you can eliminate the vices and then start over again, as each week you work on one of the particular virtues. And so after 13 weeks, and the existence of such a society should be kept a secret till it become considerable, to prevent solicitations for the admission of improper persons. That is, we don't want word to get out that we're starting this great society and have people we don't want to joining it. But that members should each of them search among his acquaintance for ingenuous, well-disposed youths to whom, with prudent caution, the scheme could gradually be communicated. The members should engage to afford their advice, assistance, and support to each other in promoting one another's interest, business, and advancement in life, and that for distinction we should be called the Society of the Free and Easy. Free as being by the general practice and habit of the virtues, free from the dominion of vice, and particularly by the practice of industry and frugality, free from debt, which exposes a man to confinement and a species of slavery to his creditors. So free and easy, you're free from debt, you're hardworking. That is, he wants a society of other young Franklins who are then going to be ready to go off and do this. But Franklin gets busy with business and never has time to attend to creating the Society of the Free and Easy. Instead, his business takes off, so he needs to devote himself to that. And in 1732, then he starts printing his almanac. And his almanac is going to make him, well, actually make him one of the wealthiest men in the country. Now, he still, in part 3, is more, a chronological story of what happened. So this happened, and I remember this, then I remember this. But he does still have these lessons with each one. So in 1736, he becomes the clerk of the General Assembly, which is a good thing. As printer, he then gets to record the debates or print the debates in the Colonial Assembly. And it's kind of a big appointment to get this particular job. He also gets contracts to print paper money for Pennsylvania and for New Jersey. So Franklin is the printer, and then he finds out, this is on page 105 in my edition, the choice was made that year without opposition. The next year, when I was again proposed, a new member made a long speech against me in order to favor some other candidate. I was, however, chosen, which was the more agreeable to me, as besides the pay for immediate service as clerk, the place gave me a better opportunity of keeping up an interest among the members, which secured me the business of printing votes, laws, paper money, and other things. So think of this, Franklin has gotten this job as the printer, or the clerk for the assembly, which leads to other things. And there is a member of the assembly who's given a long speech saying, we don't want Franklin to be the clerk anymore. What would you do if you're Franklin? You find out, this guy doesn't like you and wants to appoint someone else as printer. Seems like you have a couple of choices. Let's suppose that Sushi is the clerk of our class, and this is a lucrative position for her. And then, however, when we were making the appointment, Chloe said, no, I don't think she should be the clerk. What would you do, Sushi?
I mean, I guess maybe I'd quit.
You'd quit. Why would you quit? Because one person doesn't like you?
Then I guess I'd ask like other people, see how other
Okay.
people feel about me.
Yeah, I guess, that's certainly one thing. Shore up your friends, make sure they support you. That's good. Anyone else have thoughts on what you would do in a similar situation? By the way, Chloe speaks very highly of you, Sushi, and I was just, using her as an example. Anyone else have suggestions? I mean, that's certainly something. Yes, Chloe.
If I were her, I would probably ask like the reasoning behind it, and then probably see like not like have a debate, but kind of like open the floor just for discussion in general. Because if you're saying like, oh, like I'm going to be this person, and then all of a sudden someone's like, no, then it wasn't like it just came out of nowhere. Like I would probably open the floor to discussion to see,
Yeah, okay.
what other people have to say, just in general.
Other people or specifically Sushi?
Both. Just like I'd like to hear her point, obviously, but then also like, more discussion just in the group in general.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts what you might do in this situation? In case you ever find yourself in a situation where there's someone is against you. And, so one thing is to, as Sushi said, to make sure your friends are with you. And Chloe is trying to find out what's behind this, which is another reasonable thing.
I mean, not everyone's gonna like you.
That's very true.
So
Yeah. Not everyone is. And yeah. So what would you do, Sydney, in a case like this?
I think I would just maybe look inward for a minute, see where this possibly could have come from, and then if I find something, then I can work on that. Otherwise, I'll just carry on, I guess.
Okay. I mean, these are all the reasonable and good ideas. And I think probably there are things we should do. Anyone else thoughts on what you might do?
Hire a hitman.
Hire a hitman. Okay, now I like that kind of direct thing. And I was kind of I wasn't hoping someone would say that. And since you turned off your mic very quickly, so now I can't see who's doing that, so that's actually another possibility. You see this person doesn't like you, so you want to do something to them, which is it's a reasonable thing, I think. And, Chloe and Sushi and Sydney were being really very nice about this, thinking, well, this might be me. Not everyone's going to like me, or maybe I should find out why this person doesn't like me. Or someone saying, yeah, I'm just going to go get this person. Okay, again, it's a human reaction. Find out someone doesn't like you, you are going to return it. Okay. Short of hiring a hitman, anyone have any other thoughts going down that particular road of? Yes, Tyler.
I mean, like maybe like we don't have to kill him, but like if there's another, like if I have a job and there's someone else kind of coming for my job, I'd probably like try to like get him fired or like get rid of him in some way.
Yeah, you have to try to get him. Okay, and remember, Franklin has a printing press. So yeah, and this guy's in elected office. And someone, not Franklin, said, never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Okay, so yeah, so he could do something really to get this guy. Again, these are all kind of the kinds of reactions we might anticipate. And I'll tell you what Franklin does, because actually none of these. He doesn't like the opposition of this new member, who is a gentleman of fortune and education, and with talents that were likely to give him in time great influence in the house, which indeed afterwards happened. Okay, so that's probably something I should have added. This is a guy Franklin knows is going to have some kind of power. And so I should ask if Sushi, Chloe, or Sydney, if that changes your perception of what you might do in this case, or anyone else. And those who are on the side of hiring a hitman or trying to do something to limit the person's power, have any further thoughts what you might do in this situation? Because certainly the one thing Franklin doesn't do is, I did not, however, aim at gaining his favor by paying any servile respect to him. Yeah, certainly you find out, boy, this person's going to be a player. You better kiss up to them because they're going to wield a lot of power. So, but having heard that he had in his library a certain very scarce and curious book, I wrote a note to him expressing my desire of perusing that book and requesting would he do me the favor of lending it to me for a few days. He sent it immediately, and I returned it in about a week with another note expressing strongly my sense of the favor. So what's this all about? Yes, Tyler.
I feel like he's trying to find common ground with his sort of adversary.
That seems like it. That's one big piece of it, that this guy and he share an interest in something, which is an important thing. There's a, and so he's cultivating that. And then there's another thing he's doing here, which is also acknowledging this and really cultivating this relationship. When we next met in the house, he spoke to me, which he had never done before, that's in parentheses, and with great civility. And he ever afterwards manifested a readiness to serve me on all occasions, so that we became great friends, and our friendship continued to his death. This is another instance of the truth of an old maxim I had learnt, which says, he that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged. So it's that he asked this guy for a favor, essentially. And it's not a favor not to loan me money or not to do something else, but something that, as Tyler said, establishes this common bond that they have, or this area of common interest. So that is, I think, what makes this such an extraordinary story, is Franklin is seeing how you can do this. Here again, how you can essentially not just neutralize an enemy or hire a hitman, but turn a potential enemy into a friend or into an ally, as this guy becomes. By someone who's going to show you one kindness will show you another. So that's really what Franklin is up to here in explaining how he rises in Philadelphia. And there are going to be people who don't like him. In fact, the guy who gives his eulogy is someone who really hated Franklin all of his life. He and Franklin at first had been allies, and then they have a falling out. And this guy, we may talk about later on, is asked by Philadelphia to deliver the eulogy to Franklin. So this is really the story as he's rising. Now he's not in the assembly yet. He's the clerk of the assembly, but he is now turning his attention to public affairs. And let's see. And he starts the fire insurance in this period too. Again, thinking about public improvements. In his junto, this group of young men, all tradesmen, all working their way up, would get together every week and think about problems that they could solve. So starting a library, starting fire insurance, doing other things. And then it's in this period that the greatest evangelist of the 18th century comes to Philadelphia. This is George Whitefield. And Whitefield was part of, he was an Anglican clergyman, comes to the American colonies, actually, because he is invited by James Oglethorpe, the founder of Georgia. And Georgia had been started in the 1730s as a philanthropic colony. Does anyone know anything about the founding of Georgia? I'm sorry, I should have prepped you for this. You didn't know Georgia was going to come up. Yes, Mitchell.
Yeah, wasn't Georgia kind of like Australia, where originally they sent like prisoners, I guess other bad people of the time too?
Well, yes and no. It wasn't quite prison. There are prisoners being sent to all of the North American colonies, except, and this is going to become an issue. And one reason for Australia being founded in the 1780s was because they no longer could send convicts to America. But Georgia is started by a group of philanthropists because of the problem of people going to prison in England for debt. James Oglethorpe was a fairly wealthy guy in England. He has a friend who goes into debt. The friend winds up in debtor's prison, and while he's in debtor's prison, he dies. He catches smallpox and dies. Smallpox outbreak in the prisons, and Oglethorpe's friend, who's in prison for debt, dies. So Oglethorpe thinks essentially this guy died because he went into debt. And is that really a just thing? So Oglethorpe has this idea of creating a colony where you can send people who had gone into debt, and there they could recoup their fortunes. That is, they could learn how to work hard, not be in debt anymore, and everyone would work out. So started with this philanthropic impulse and continues it for about 20 years, but I should say it doesn't really work. The one problem they have in Georgia is that a lot of these folks, the debtors, I mean, for a lot of them, there was a reason they were in debt. It's because they hadn't done what someone like Franklin said they should do. Okay. And so they go to Georgia, and one problem is they never had really worked hard in England. And the second problem is the climate is really much different in Georgia from in England. So a lot of them wind up dying, which means now you have orphans in Georgia. However, there are still philanthropists in England who want to support this enterprise in Georgia because they like the idea of sending off poor debtors and have them recover. So Whitfield is a great evangelist, and he goes to Georgia and he sees the problem of all of these orphan children. So he creates an orphanage. And he goes on a speaking tour throughout the American colonies to raise money for the orphanage. And he gets to know Franklin. Franklin gets the contract to print all of Whitfield's travel journals. Another printer in Philadelphia gets the contract to print all of Whitfield's sermons. So this is kind of a big deal for Franklin to get the deal because Whitfield is a celebrity. People flock to hear this guy because he is such a great speaker. He didn't have a church in England, so he would preach outside and thousands of people could hear him. So Whitfield is he's preaching all the way through the colonies, and let's see, the settlement of that province had lately been begun. So this is in the 1740s, about 10 years or so after Georgia had been founded. But instead of being made with hardy, industrious husbandmen, that is farmers, accustomed to labor, the only people fit for such an enterprise, it was with families of broken shopkeepers and other insolvent debtors, many of indolent and idle habits, taken out of the jails, who being set down in the woods, unqualified for clearing land and unable to endure the hardships of a new settlement, perished in numbers, leaving many helpless children unprovided for. The sight of their miserable situation inspired the benevolent heart of Mr. Whitfield with the idea of building an orphan house there, in which they might be supported and educated. Returning northward, he preached up this charity and made large collections, for his eloquence had a wonderful power over the hearts and purses of his hearers, of which I myself was an instance. I did not disapprove of the design, but as Georgia was then destitute of materials and workmen, and it was proposed to send them from Philadelphia at great expense, I thought it would have been better to have built the house here and brought the children to it. That is, instead of sending workmen and wood and bricks down to Georgia, why don't we just bring the orphans to Philadelphia? Doesn't that make more sense? Okay, this I advised, but he was resolute in his project. rejected my counsel, and I thereupon refused to contribute. I happened soon after, well, again, so Whitfield isn't going to get anything out of Franklin, or so Franklin thinks. Let's just conclude with this last episode. He had a loud and clear voice and articulated his words and sentences so perfectly that he might be heard and understood at a great distance, especially as his auditories, however numerous, observed the most exact silence. He preached one evening from the top of the courthouse steps, which are in the middle of Market Street, and on the west side of 2nd Street, which crosses it at right angles. Both streets were filled with his hearers to a considerable distance. Being among the hindmost in Market Street, I had the curiosity to learn how far he could be heard by retiring backwards down the street toward the river, and I found his voice distinct till I came near Front Street, when some noise in that street obscured it. Imagining then a semicircle of which my distance should be the radius, and that it were filled with auditors, to each of whom I allowed 2 square feet, I computed that he might well be heard by more than 30,000. This reconciled me to newspaper accounts of his having preached to 25,000 people in the fields, and to ancient histories of generals haranguing whole armies, of which I had sometimes doubted. Now, Whitfield is staying with Franklin during his visit to Philadelphia. What do you think what do you think his reaction would be when he got home that night and Franklin told him, while you were preaching, I calculated how many people might have been listening, and actually there could have been 25,000 people within the sound of your voice? Yes, Mitchell.
That's like, I don't know, if I was him at that time, I would be really, really impressed, because 25,000 people, that's the same capacity that Madison Square Garden has.
Well, it's true. That is impressive. That, that's as many people now as fit into Madison Square Garden. It's so he could have been preaching to Fenway Park, which is really a remarkable thing. What was Whitfield saying in this sermon, according to Franklin? Is Franklin hearing what Whitfield is saying, or is he simply measuring how far his voice is carried? Which is an interesting thing. It's a phenomenon. The reason we know how many people could listen to Whitfield is because Franklin did this calculation. But I'm just thinking about for Whitfield, it would be as though at the end of one of my lectures, you tell me how many times I use a certain phrase, or that how many people could have heard it. And it's not really listening to what Whitfield is saying, but instead Franklin has other interests, and he's not going to let his friendship for Whitfield get in the way of him. So I think we've probably talked enough. Well, I'm actually just getting started. If I didn't have another class, I'd probably spend the next hour or two just sitting here reading aloud from Franklin's autobiography and talking about it. I will let you go, since you've done well, and I will hope to see you on Thursday back in class. Okay, any final questions, thoughts? Okay, well, I'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Take
Bye,
care.
thank you.
Bye.
Hi, Professor. I have a question about the blog. So I tried a few days ago logging on, and I created an account, but it won't let me post anything.
Okay, it's probably because I haven't cleared you to join. So I will do that, and then you should be able to. Okay, I'll do that as soon as. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah,
Great,
because I
Michael.
completed the poem assignment for today, but I just tried to post, but I didn't. So
Okay.
I have it's all done. I just need to post it.
And then also the picture of yourself with a Franklin monument and a little introduction of yourself is something else to do.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Great. Take care.
Have a good one.